Well, thanks, Matt, for inviting me to do this. I appreciate it. I was born in Buffalo, New York, back November 27th, 1942, and I think the first 5 years we lived in Buffalo area, and at some point before I was born, my parents had bought a lot on Grand Island, New York, which is an island in the middle of the Niagara River between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So my memories mostly are of on Grand Island, even before we moved there. It was during the war. You couldn't get building materials such as copper wire, pipes, stuff like that. You could get wood and you could get concrete, but that was about it. So there was maybe 3 houses in the neighborhood, as I remember, in, let's say, 1945, 46 time frame, which is probably my earliest memories. And we all lived in concrete basements with a wood floor above it, covered with tar paper. And we brought our water over from the Buffalo area, and we bathed in the river. And we did that probably until about 47 or 48, when the copper wire and pipes got inexpensive enough that my father could afford to purchase it and complete the house. So somewhere around 1948, we actually moved over to Grand Island completely. And that's where I started the first grade and went through the 8th grade. We had one school on Grand Island with all grades through 9th grade. We didn't have an actual high school. So at the end of the 9th grade, you would have to go over to the mainland to one of 3 schools, generally speaking, that they would transport you to. I chose at the end of 8th grade to leave and go to a vocational school in Buffalo. So I would walk a mile up to the main road, hitchhiking along the way, and generally before I got to that main road, I would get a ride somewhere close. But if I didn't, which happened occasionally, I would have to take a inner city transit bus over to Buffalo, get off of that, and transfer on to 1 to 2 more buses, city buses, to get to the high school. So it was a little different than today, when I watch parents driving their kids 3 blocks to the local elementary school near my house.
Yeah.
So, but it was different times, I guess, and so on. So I went to a vocational high school in Buffalo, took wooden boat building, marine engine repair. Unfortunately, in my junior year, I saw my first fiberglass boat, knew that it wasn't going to be a long career in wooden boat building. So I did try working in the industry, so to speak, for the summer after I graduated. Got laid off at the end of the summer, and went to work for my father, who was an electrical contractor. Mostly worked for himself, other than I had helped him on weekends and summer vacations during high school, so I was kind of familiar with the work. And I did that for about 9 months to a year when I decided that I wanted to join the Navy.
Nice. So how did your family react when you decided that you wanted to go into the Navy?
Well, I had 3 uncles in the Navy during World War II. 2 of them were at Pearl Harbor, and one of those 2 was still on active duty. So I guess you could say my mother was quite happy that I chose the Navy over the Army. Although I can't say that I really chose the Navy. I actually wanted to go in the Coast Guard. But to get to a recruiter in those days, you had to go to downtown Buffalo, and parking in downtown Buffalo cost $1, and I was making $1.50 an hour, and I went twice, and the Coast Guard recruiter was never in. So on the second time, as I was walking back down the hall, the Navy recruiter saw me and said, "Hey, can I help you?" I said, "Nah, I'm looking for the Coast Guard recruiter." And he says, "Well, he's out, but come on in. I'll tell you all about the Coast Guard." And, of course, I joined the Navy. The idea of he put in my head was that I'd end up on a icebreaker in the Arctic. You know, if I joined the Coast Guard, and if I joined the Navy, I would be out in the South Pacific with these hammocks between palm trees and so on. So it seemed like a better deal. But the bottom line is I wanted to join the Navy because of the draft, and at the time we were still drafting and sending folks to Korea. And the idea of being in a foxhole in the snow and the rain in Korea had absolutely no appeal to me. So, and my cousin had been drafted about 6 months before, and that supposedly was where he was going, but he never did end up there, but that's what the word was, you know. So that kind of propelled me to decide to join the Navy. Frankly, things were going very good. I didn't have any particular reason to leave home except that things were going very good. And I said, well, you know, I think I'd like to get this over with, you know, while I still felt like coming back home again, you know. It's not that I didn't want to come back home.
Yeah.
In fact, it was always my intention to eventually come back home. I just didn't get to do that for about 40 years. So
you're about 18 or 19 at this time?
Yes.
And the Vietnam War hadn't started yet?
It had not.
Okay.
No, not in August of 1961. Frankly, I never heard of Vietnam.
Okay.
You know, but I eventually heard about it and was there. So.
Okay. What did so we talked about your family.
So my father, he was he never said anything much one way or another. He was 4F, meaning that, you know, he couldn't get in the service during World War II. He worked, probably wouldn't have been taken anyway, because he worked at a defense plant, making tires for the Army's motorcycles, which were a big thing in World War II, I guess.
Yeah.
They had a whole plant to do that.
Did you have any friends that were in the same boat as you?
I would say so. Yeah, my best friend in high school had already joined the Navy, probably right out of high school, so almost a year before I did.
Did you ever reconnect when you were back?
We did. Once I was in the Navy, yes. My first duty station was across the Narragansett Bay from his duty station, so
we'll get into that later. Yeah. Then. That's interesting. That's very cool to, you know, you have your best friend there and you both ultimately decide to serve the country and go in. That's unique right there. So most of your career or work experience beforehand was hands-on, doing things like that. Does that eventually translate into what you did in the service, or?
To some extent. Certainly the first 10 years I was an electrician. Okay. So, you know, that kind of fit in with that aspect of it, although the Navy, you know, when you go through boot camp, they have a sailor that interviews you and helps decide what the career field, what rating you would be going into. Mm-hmm. And they wanted me to be either a pattern maker, based on my experience with wood, or engineman, based on my training in marine engines. Okay. So, I can't say that I ever really did that in the Navy, any of that sort of work. It was all as an electrician for 6 years on diesel submarines.
And your dad was also doing electrical work, so
he was. Yeah, he was, and he was never a proponent of going to college. He didn't see any reason for, you should learn a trade. Whereas my mother was the opposite. She wanted us all to go to college. But,
yeah, it's interesting how today's world is kind of going back to that, where people are seeing the value of doing a vocational trade or something like that, where I feel like for years plumbing and electricians and all that stuff was kind of looked down on, but now I think people start to realize that that we need people to do those jobs. But, okay.
And having gone to a vocational high school where they didn't even teach algebra class, for instance, there was a thing called shop math for 1 year, and another year of bookkeeping associated with running your own business, I guess you'd say, keeping books as part of your trade type of thing. So there wasn't really any opportunity for me to get into college without some extensive additional work that I would have had to do.
Okay. So you make the conscious decision. You originally want to go into Coast Guard, but now the Navy recruiter has successfully changed your mind.
Yep.
And what's the time in between going to the recruiter and actually going to Great Lakes?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was from April to August.
Oh, so a lot of anticipation.
There was some very significant in my life at that time, things going on during the summer that I didn't want to miss. During my entire high school years, I was building racing boats and racing them during the summer. And of course, I wanted to have one more season of racing. And the last race was going to be the first week of August. And then, of course, there was the Fireman's Picnic, which was the big social event on the island in those days. So I couldn't miss that opportunity, so that's why it was the 9th of August, a Monday after the Saturday Fireman's Picnic, that I elected to go in. And they kept trying to talk me into going earlier, naturally. But I held out till that.
Nice. Were the races on the Great Lakes?
They were on the Niagara River.
Oh. Okay.
And in those days, we even had the Gold Cup hydroplane races on the Niagara River there. But these were just little outboard engines. What I raced was 10 horsepower and an 11-foot long boat that was about a foot deep.
Yeah.
So it was a small thing, so to speak, compared to the big races that also went on the river. But they were fun. Kept us busy.
Before you go to Great Lakes, into training, was there anything significant, or people, or pets, or anything that you left behind in order to go complete your duty?
Well, certainly, at that time I had 5 brothers and sisters at home. My grandfather lived with us, and of course I had a dog. So it was hard to leave, but yet I actually wanted to leave, though. I wanted to see the world. It was a pretty small world for us. The farthest probably I had ever traveled in my life before getting on that train to go to Great Lakes Naval Training Station was probably 50 miles from home.
Yeah. Wow.
And we didn't leave the island all that often. I'd probably been to a movie theater 2 or 3 times in my life at that point. And maybe the biggest thing was go to a skating rink on the mainland that maybe 4, 5, 6 times in my life. So, it wasn't easy to leave, but I was also looking forward to it, seeing the world, so to speak. That was my objective.
Right. So paint me the picture of the first day you get to Great Lakes. Or did you take a bus there?
Took the train.
What was that train ride like?
Well, it's actually funny that you asked that, because I think right away I maybe perhaps demonstrated some leadership capability in that train ride, because I was put in charge of the 5 of us that were leaving from Buffalo to go to Great Lakes. And they had given us some type of voucher to take the train. And I remember when we got to the station and I met these 5 guys who I had never met before, I talked them into taking all 3 days that we actually had to get to Great Lakes instead of going directly there, which was our orders, so to speak, verbal orders from the recruiter. And we spent 2 days in Chicago having fun on the way there. Now, you also got to understand is that at $1.50 an hour, you don't make a lot of money in those days. And I was given half of that to my mother for room and board, so to speak. So there wasn't a lot of money, and my shoes were worn out. There's another reason why I felt that I should go join the service, is I could get a whole new set of clothes. And my shoe soles was starting to come apart. Not too bad at the moment I got on the train, but by the time I got there to the actual boot camp on the first day, you would take a step and it would go whack, 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 every step. So you can imagine that brought a little bit of attention from our Marine friend here that has been through boot camp. You don't want to have attention brought to you.
Yeah.
So I had I got these, in those days you didn't have clothespins to hang your stuff on the clothesline at the boot camp. You had these tie wrap things. I forget what we actually called them, but there were strings about let's say a foot long. So I would tie one of those around my sole to hold it on. And for some unknown reason, they just couldn't get uniforms for us that first week. So I had to go a whole week of marching around with this string tied around my shoe, bringing even more attention because it still flapped.
Yeah.
So that's my vision of it. But not only that, I didn't really know, like some others, starboard and port and so on. And so I often turned in the wrong direction when they said something. And so the kick in the butt from the company commander, I guess that's who it was, company commander. I think that's what they called him anyway, a first-class petty officer named Giles.
It's funny you still remember his name.
Yes, and I like the guy. I don't have any, it's he did a lot of good work with us, to tell you the truth, in getting us ready for the Navy. So, the unwanted attention and the kick in the butt probably were the main things I can remember about boot camp arrival. Okay.
Were there any other vivid memories you have of basic, aside from the shoelace?
I absolutely hated inspections. Every morning they get out there and they'd look up and down. And I had one, this is now once we had our uniform, I had a seagull drop his load right on the side of my head just before inspection as we're standing there. So you can imagine how that went over. Any excuse, to make an issue of somebody was taken. So after that, I volunteered to clean the heads every morning, so I didn't have to go out to inspection. And I would say ever after that, any time that I could find an excuse to be on duty or something, whenever there was some sort of inspection, I took it. I never really liked getting dressed up. Still don't.
That's funny because now you're an officer, so.
Yes, and it was hard to find excuses eventually.
Did you get your rate when you were in training, or was that before? I know you mentioned about doing electrical work, and that's what you did for.
Yeah. So during boot camp they interview you, and I had signed up on a contract that said I was guaranteed electronics field school, and I was looking at that as electronics technician, and I had thought that, well, if I learned something about electronics, I could become a TV repairman after I get out. I was looking for some type of schooling that would train me for a field that I felt, because I knew wooden boat building wasn't going to do it. And my uncle that was still on active duty was a personnelman, a warrant officer out in California, and I talked with him on the phone a lot, and he coached me what to ask for and how to negotiate with a recruiter to get what I wanted. So I'm sitting there, and they're wanting to send me as a pattern maker school or engineman school or something. I said, no, I'm here as an electronics technician. And so he looks over the paperwork and says, well, he says, electronics field. He says that could be electronics technician, an electrician, or an intercommunications I don't know, specialist or something, ICman in the Navy it was called. And so he kept trying to talk me into something else, and I said, well, nope, this is what I've got. If you can't deliver that, I guess I get to go home, right? He says, no. He says, okay, well, I don't think you're going to make it through, but I'll send you to electrician's mate school. So there was another big incentive, almost like the kick in the butt. Somebody telling you that you basically aren't smart enough to make it through school. Yeah. Could have been right for all I knew, because I never really liked school much.
Yeah.
And certainly in high school I didn't get the type of schooling that was going to prepare me for the rest of my career. But I had the good fortune. What he finally said is, we'll send you to a duty station for 6 months, then bring you back to Great Lakes for electrician's mate school, Class A school. So that's what actually happened. I got sent to Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And I was in the small boat division. We had 5 small boats. I think it was 4 40-footers and 1 60-footer. And our job was, because the Quonset Point Naval Air Station was a seaplane base in those days with a few jets, and so on. Our job was to go out and clear the sea lanes for the seaplanes to land in the bay.
Yeah,
practice doing that, and also there was a lot of reserves that would fly in during the weekend. And the runways ended right at the bay, and so we would have to stand off in the end of the runways in the water on the small boats in case we needed to pick somebody up, and that did happen. And I would say that the first time I had to carry a body bag, I decided that flying was too hazardous for the $55 a month that you were getting to fly. Of course, that was a very, I guess you'd say, limited local look at it.
Yeah.
But about that time, I was also thinking about getting married on $88 a month, and realized that I had to do something else in the Navy if I was going to afford to get married. So I was looking at other options to do that. And right about the time before I was ready to leave there, I had decided that, okay, I think I'm going to volunteer for submarines. we hadn't lost a submarine since World War II, which was true. We hadn't actually lost one at that point. We had a few that sank that I didn't know about. But anyway, yeah, I ended up going to electrician's mate Class A school at Great Lakes in 1962. But I actually had some really interesting experience as well as at Quonset Point.
Okay.
Because as you may remember, 1961, John F. Kennedy was in the White House, and both him and his wife had properties up in Newport, Rhode Island, so they would fly into Quonset Point Naval Air Station on Air Force One and transfer to one of our small boats, and we would ferry them over to Newport.
Wow.
So that was like the closest I'd ever come to a United States national politician figure. Naturally, I wasn't allowed to even speak to them or to the kids, but I would say that I probably got as close as anybody to them. I might be on the bow, riding the bow as a line handler most of the time, but that was like maybe 30 feet from them, with a few Secret Service in between.
Yeah. Did they ring the bells and everything when he came on board?
I don't remember that. I don't know that we even had a bell, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
But it was also in those days, not on those occasions, but on the small boats, a lot of fog out there, and so I also became the radar operator with absolutely no training, no idea what a radar even was. When the bosun would say, "O'Day, go down below and tell me what you see on the radar," I said, "All I see is a bunch of green stuff all over the place." It was like learning to swim by somebody throwing you in the water. So that was an interesting aspect of it, I guess you could say. But I did enjoy the time there. But I was happy to go ahead and move on.
Okay. All right. So your time in Rhode Island, your best friend also happens to be in Rhode Island, right, and also in the Navy. So
right. And he had been in the same class as I at the vocational high school, taking wooden boat building. So they had made him a pattern maker. And so he was on a destroyer tender over in Newport as a pattern maker. And a pattern maker's job is to make something that eventually is going to be poured as a piece of metal of some sort that then would get machined on the tender and become a part of the ship of some sort. There, most of those ships at that time, 1961, 62, were all World War II leftovers. Some of them had gone into the reserve fleet, and then maybe taken out in the 50s, done some reconditioning on and put back to work. Mm-hmm. But there was always plenty to be done on them, on any of the ships in those days. So his name was Ray Tessie, and he was a pattern maker. I can't remember the name of the tender right now, but it'll probably Yosemite, on the Yosemite, USS Yosemite. And I would be at Quonset Point on the small boats. We often had runs over to Newport to the Navy docks there for one reason or another. And so if there was an hour or more, I'd just run up on the tender and go find the shop, and there was on occasions that maybe I might stay over on the tender overnight and catch another small boat going back, when I was off duty, that sort of thing. I remember the Newport Jazz Festival was one weekend that I did that. And not that we got into the Jazz Festival, we couldn't afford it, but we were outside the outside the gates, outside the fence, if you will. He had a friend with a house that kind of bordered that field that it was held on. But anyway, and the other thing I can remember about that is that those days we had a lot of Navy clocks with uranium on the dials to make them be bright at night. Bright enough to see in a dim light anyway. But we had to get rid of them. There was an order came out from high up that said, hey, you got to get all those clocks and take them to the dump and dump them. So I remember riding on the stake bed truck, the back of the stake truck, bed truck, on this pile of Navy clocks. And there was hundreds and hundreds of them. And we took them out to the dump and dumped them. Now, I didn't know anything about uranium. I thought it was all a bunch of bull, I guess, I don't know.
Different times.
Yep. And so, anyway.
Yeah, so we go back to Chicago area.
Yep.
Back to Great Lakes, back to A school.
Right.
And now you're in school to be an electrician.
Right. Well, let me back up one more time. At Quonset Point, I had the absolute good fortune for working for a chief electrician at the boathouse. And there was 3 of us that were there, all from the same boot camp classes. Although I don't recall knowing them, in boot camp, but we met there at the boathouse, and the chief made the first class electrician and second class electrician spend an hour every day teaching us basic electricity. So we also had correspondence courses in one was called Basic Electricity. We also did the Electrician's Mate 3 and 2, that's Petty Officer 3 and 2 course book that's supposed to prepare you for the exams for third class and second class Electrician's Mate. And I don't know how many others. I did the math ones, correspondence courses, algebra correspondence course, that sort of thing.
Wow.
So that at the end of the 6 months, we were prepared to go to A school.
Was this a chief that was?
This was a chief electrician.
He really set you guys up.
He did, and I can't say that, I've ever maybe experienced such a strong mentor in my Navy career as Chief Thomas. So the 3 of us get to Electricians A school, and frankly, none of the 3 of us had any problems with it. But I would say that Electricians Mate A school was where I finally realized that I could actually learn if I put my mind to it. If I had a reason, if I saw the light of how I was going to use this information. I think that was really the hard part of grade school was I just didn't see how I would ever use the information they were trying to teach me.
Yeah.
But I was always a big reader. All through grade school and high school, library was one of my favorite places. And in the Navy, that was true as well. I would say that, once I actually got on submarines, I know I was reading 1 book a day. And I volunteered to be the library petty officer for the sub so that I could pick the books.
So before you complete your
A school,
yep, you've already made a conscious decision in Rhode Island that you want to go into the submarine fleet.
I did.
Now, how did the Navy react when you told them that at A school? Were they all in favor of that?
Yes, there wasn't any problem with that. I applied for submarine school, and before I was out of A school, it had been granted, and I was set up to go right from A school directly to submarine school.
Okay. And where was that?
Submarine school was in Groton, Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're still in the New England area.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of going back and forth.
Yeah. About 40 minutes from your other base.
Yeah.
So
right.
What was it like being at Groton in that time?
Cold. I can remember having duty on Thanksgiving, November 1962 in Groton, Connecticut. And the duty consisted of dumpster watch. So the dumpster is a big, just like today, big metal container that they threw garbage in.
Yeah.
And it was in a parking lot down on the river itself. You know, it's a pretty big base, so you could get quite a ways from the river if you tried. Most of the schools were not close to the river. So this was right down on the river, meaning that it was cold, windy, wet, damp all the time in the winter. But this particular day, it snowed 24 inches. So I'm walking around the dumpster in snow up to my knees.
Yeah.
So,
but you're from Buffalo, so you should be.
But that's why I joined the Navy and thought about those South Pacific islands.
Yeah. They trick you in Groton.
Yeah. So that propelled me right at the last week of submarine school. You got to find out what your duty station is going to be. And I picked Hawaii. It seems like I had a choice. I don't know how big a choice I had. I don't think it was an exceptionally big choice. But it was kind of the same setup as I recall as officer submarine school, where based on your class standing, they had this whole pile of billets, and you got to go pick based on that.
Yeah, it seems that they still primarily do that in the Naval Academy, and I was an OCS instructor.
Mm-hmm.
We did something similar when I was in OCS. That's how they did it. I think when I was an instructor, I kind of let the students decide a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because they're all going to be leaders, so I was letting it ultimately come down to them. But that's neither here or there.
Yeah.
But, so, what is your first official command then?
Well, so from submarine school, I got sent to Hawaii for the USS Bashaw. It was a AGSS 241, AG meaning an auxiliary, because at the time there was a limit on the number of submarines that the Navy could have. And who put that limit on it, I don't recall, whether it was self-imposed or some other imposition. But so what they did with a lot of the old diesel submarines was just redesignate them as auxiliary yard craft, so the AG in front of the SS. And that way the money to operate them came out of a different pot, and they didn't have to count them. So I think what it was is that they were starting to build the nuclear submarines at that point, and they wanted the submarine billets, if you will, to go to the nuclear ones and not to the old diesel boats. So that's how I think they got this auxiliary submarine designation in there.
Okay.
So anyway, I took that opportunity, though, to between going from Groton, Connecticut to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, to stop in Buffalo and get married. So we left Buffalo in a friend's car who wanted the car taken out to Phoenix, Arizona. A 1961 Pontiac Bonneville. So we kind of left on our honeymoon in this nice new car, going down Route 66 in its heyday to Phoenix, Arizona. And then after that, we took the bus bus up to Whitaker, California, where my wife's grandmother lived, and we spent a few days there. And we then took the bus up to Walnut Creek, where my uncle, who was still in the Navy at the time, no, actually, he had just retired, I think a month or two before he was living. And then he took me over to the base in Travis Air Force Base in California, where I caught the military plane that took me over to Hawaii, and my wife went back to her grandmother's in California.
You know, for growing up in the Buffalo area and not really going anywhere.
That's it.
You start traveling the country.
I did. Yeah, and it's amazing. We didn't have Waze on our cell phone in those days, you know. Yeah. We had a few maps. And I sometimes wonder how we ever found our way across country as many times as we did
and the
during our career with just maps.
The interstate's still pretty much in its infancy being built.
It was, yeah.
And that's pretty crazy. It's pretty fun, though. I mean,
it was different. Yeah, different times, different, you know, but I don't ever remember really, like, being lost type of thing, or feeling lost anyway. I might have been lost. Didn't even know it, but, yeah. So, you know, in those days, unless you were E5 and above, you didn't get your dependents to come over to Hawaii. They didn't transport them over there, and so on. So I spent a couple of months over there without my wife being there. And the tempo of operations was such that it probably wouldn't have mattered a whole lot. You know, I wouldn't have been home that much anyway. But then we were scheduled to go into the shipyard there at Pearl Harbor for an overhaul that was going to last 3 months. So I I found an apartment 5 blocks back from Waikiki Beach. And it was right between the beach and the big dome. If you ever watched Hawaii 5-0 back in the day, the police story. So we were right in between the beach and that location. And it's really amazing that I could afford it. But it did cost us $80 a month. And I wasn't making much more than that. Because I was still a seaman apprentice making $88 a month. And, but after about a month or two there, we got into some old World War II prisoner of war barracks out in Aiea, which is an area that's where I think it was state-run housing at the time. That Hawaii had just become a state, like maybe 2 years before or something. And so it was $55 a month. So we moved out there. Oh, that area is now the south parking lot of the football stadium. So if you're ever watching the football stadium and they show the pictures of the parking lots, which on occasion they do, and we can say, oh yeah, that's where our house used to be. Not a house really. It was a big row of wooden single-story buildings that were on concrete blocks about 3 foot off the ground. And it was interesting because it wasn't just Navy folks. There was a Marine living next door, but there was some folks from the Solomon Islands that lived behind us, and a lot of Hawaiians and so on. So culturally, for somebody from Buffalo that basically grew up with Irish and Polish and Italians and Germans around, it was a major eye-opening, I guess you could say, of different cultures. So, but we really enjoyed it, even though we didn't have enough money to do anything except go to the beach. The beaches were spectacular. Yeah. And they weren't crowded in those days. We've been back since, and it's nowhere near the same atmosphere that we enjoyed in those days, where we could go camp on the beach just set up a pump and spend the weekend, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what years are you at this first command?
I arrived there in January of 1963, and I spent 2.5 years on that submarine.
Okay.
Including a 7-month Western Pacific tour, which got us involved in Vietnam.
So that was basically the primary mission of their time in service on that command.
That command, yes. So for 2.5 years, I made third-class petty officer and second-class petty officer on that, and went from my first duties on there were in the deck gang, because we had too many electricians already on board. So in that 2.5 years, though, I went from the deck gang to being in the electrical gang and being a senior controllerman, meaning that in the operation of the submarine electrically, that was the senior guy as a second-class petty officer.
Were you able to bring your wife over once you put on?
I did, yeah. After she was already over there. I brought her over after about 2 months, so while I was still a seaman apprentice. And so it really, having made second class, only did one good thing for me, and that's that when we were in Hong Kong, I got 2 notices. One from the draft board saying I was to report for a draft interview or something like that. I was supposed to report to Buffalo to the draft board. And another one from the Navy saying that I was to be detached from the Bashaw and sent to nuclear power school in
South Carolina.
No, in New York.
Okay, upstate New York.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
I can't remember the
Saratoga Springs, I think is the name of it. Saratoga, yeah. Anyway, so both of those, came in the same mail call. So I took them both up to the XO and said, hey, here's he says, I know about the sub school. He says, I hate to do it, but I think we're going to have to send you. And I said to him, well, if you send me, I said, the very first thing I'm going to do when I'm going to get there is apply for, forget what they called it in those days, but basically it was a government subsidy to eat. It was welfare.
Yeah.
I'm going to get on the welfare rolls because I got a wife and a kid, and there's no way as a second class I can afford to go rent a house in upstate New York and live. So I says, I'm going to be not paying much attention to my studies. I'll probably flunk out in the first 2 weeks and get to go someplace else. Go back to another submarine, diesel submarine. And he says, well, if that's how you feel about it, I guess we could put an operational hold on you. So we did that, and he says, oh, I'll take care of the draft board, by the way. So then I never did hear anything more about either of those 2 options. I got to stay on for like another year. The submarine had a change of home port while we were in the Western Pacific to San Diego. So eventually we ended up back in San Diego. But during that time, we had some very interesting operations, getting to see more of the world. Of course, we had several stops in Subic Bay in the Philippines, and Okinawa, and Bangkok, Thailand, 30 miles up a dirty river, the dirtiest river I'd ever seen in my life. But it was a very interesting time. Yeah. In Bangkok. It's not having ever been to Venice, Italy. I imagine it was something like that. There was waterways were the transportation hub of the day. These things we called bumboats, long, big, let's say maybe 16-foot long, big canoes in a way, with a outboard motor on them. There was just a little, almost airplane engine size, but on a long shaft that was probably 8 foot long and a propeller on the end of it. And that would pick us up right alongside the submarine and take us all over the city.
Wow.
So it was very interesting. I saw some very interesting boat building going on the shore. Had to get off and go see that. And
go help them?
And, well, they were doing it the hard way. They had a pit.
Teaching what you learned back in New York.
Yeah, they had a pit in the ground and a log over the pit. And a guy down in the pit and then one up standing on the log with a 2-man saw going up and down, cutting the boards. And as soon as they cut them, a couple other guys would take them over and put them on the boat.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, this was pretty crude in my experience of boat building, but it worked. I mean, yeah. they were using boats to live on and do commerce on and everything on. Tell you the truth. So they seemed to know what they were doing. But obviously Hong Kong was another very interesting experience. The thing that we found in Hong Kong was that the tailor shops would all serve the sailors drinks of whatever you wanted while you're waiting, between the time that they measured you up and started bringing out clothes to decide what it is you were going to have made, because everything was going to be tailor-made. They would ply you with drinks. So I ended up as I think I was third-class petty officer by then, but third-class petty officer with a white doe-skin tuxedo. I don't think I ever wore it, but I had it. Handmade boots. They would put your foot down on a piece of cardboard and trace off your foot. And go make your boots and come back in a couple hours and pick it up. So it was kind of interesting. It was different. I can remember thinking I should buy some stuff for my wife. And what you got to remember too is that in those days the American dollar was worth a lot. I mean, and Camel cigarettes. I was never a smoker, but we got what was called C rations, and I forget how it worked, but you got like a carton, let's say a carton of cigarettes for every week you were going to be at sea or something like that. I forget. And I think it cost us $1 a carton or something in those days. And so we would load up on those. I'd been told to load up on those before we ever left the States. And we would trade those for lots of things.
That was like your on-board currency, or was it like when you went to this country?
It got to be on-board currency after about 4 or 5 months being gone. But more it was local trading currency, camels and U.S. bucks. Both went a long way in those days. So,
and this is all before going to San Diego.
This was all before getting to San Diego. This is why we're out in the Western Pacific, and most of the stuff I bought in Hong Kong, Yokosuka, Japan, and Subic Bay, Philippines. And they actually in Japan they had a big sea box for us. What do they call them today? I see them out there in the not the sidewalk, in the driveway of a lot of homes. These big metal boxes, to put stuff in,
like a pod.
Yeah, a pod. So they had a pod there for us in Yokosuka. And we could go over to exchange, buy stuff, and take it over and put it in the pod, and eventually it would get shipped back. So I still have china sets and glassware. Not much glassware left anymore, but a few pieces of glassware and other stuff that I got in those days. But I was telling you about Hong Kong and trying to buy some stuff for my wife, which was really interesting. I mean, she was probably, 21, 22, a typical size for that age. But in Hong Kong, I mean, she was big. They're all small, and they aren't talking, I'm just in a regular department store in the lingerie area and looking at like nightgowns and stuff. And these things look like they're made for kids.
Yeah.
And I keep trying to tell them, bigger, wider, and they're all just kind of laughing behind their hands, and I never did find anything. I took some stuff home, but it didn't fit. It was never big enough. They had nothing in that store that was big enough.
Wow.
It was interesting. But anyway, so moving on. So we were heading from Hong Kong to Australia. I thought I had it made. We were almost at the equator. We were gearing up for the big ceremony of crossing the equator. When we get orders to go back, and we ended up in the South China Sea in July 1964. And we were landing U.S. Navy SEAL teams and Royal Thai Marines on the beaches at Vietnam. We'd go in. They'd get up on the deck with their rubber rafts and take off and go in. And the SEAL teams, we'd go back and pick up 2 weeks later approximately.
What year is this about?
This is July and August of 1964. We had 5,000, what did they call them, advisors in Vietnam at the time. And when we went back to pick them up, it was just like you might have seen on the I can't even think of the name of the submarine show on TV in those early or late 50s time frames, where the submarine would go along with its periscope up, and the two rafts would have a line between them. You'd catch them, and the rafts would swing around back behind onto the deck, and you would broach up and bring them aboard. So that was kind of interesting. We happened to be there doing that on the 3rd and 4th of August, 1964, which unless you were perhaps there in the time, you wouldn't remember that was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, whereby the North Vietnamese torpedo patrol boats that were coming out trying to depth charge us, and so on, in the rain, perhaps fog of the night, ran into the USS Turner Joy and in the Maddox, USS Maddox, and shot up their superstructures. And at the same time, we ended up being in so close to shore that we dinged up our prop. So now it had this noise, which is what you don't want to have on a submarine, is emanating noise while your prop is turning. So we all went back to Subic Bay, Philippines, where we were tied up right across from the Turner Joy and Maddox, and I got to see the evidence, I guess you would say, of that incident, and actually learned for the first time what it was we were really doing. So that all ended, I'm going to say sometime around the 1st of September then, for us, and we went on to other duties.
Did your feelings change a little bit? Like, were you more on edge now? We're like recognizing like, this is like a war now? And
well, yeah, I was more on edge, certainly to some extent. But I became more on edge in April of 1963, You remember I mentioned that I chose submarines to go into for the $55 a month hazardous duty pay. I get to my first submarine in January of 63, and in April of 63, the USS Thresher goes down with all hands. This is a nuclear-powered submarine, just out of the shipyard. And so that made me rethink this whole business and saying, did I just make a huge mistake here? Yeah. But, and we had a few incidents. Remember, this is a World War II era submarine that was getting very little in maintenance upkeep dollars. So it's not like it was ever intended to even last this long, 20-some years later. But I never really had any, at that point, I never really had any major fear of being on the submarine.
Okay.
Even though we'd had problems of our own coming out of the shipyard, there was some holes in the hull that had never gotten plugged. There were some valves on the torpedo tubes that leaked. There was a incident where we bounced off of something out in the middle of the ocean where there shouldn't have been any seamount that was on the charts. Stuff like that, that we never did know what it was we hit, but we certainly bounced off it. So there's all kinds of issues, I guess you could say, that crop up. And when you're well below the surface, all those issues seem way more intimidating than if you're on the surface, I think, and where you can get over the side. And in those days, I had this irrational idea that I could actually swim to shore. They had told us about hypothermia and so on, and how long you'd last in 55-degree water and stuff like that. But I was sure that I could swim to shore. I could swim anywhere. But I knew I couldn't fly. That's why I didn't want to be in airplanes. So anyway.
Were you, now, so I'm a little familiar with the way that most of the watches are on the submarines. Like, did they, even though you were doing electrical work, were you also standing watch?
Oh, yes. Everybody on board except for the corpsman was required to stand watches. And
did they make you do like time motion analysis and all that? Like, did you have to learn that at your rate yet?
No, or? Not in these days as an electrician on it.
Okay.
But that said, I had a thirst for knowledge. I was still doing correspondence courses. I borrowed from the navigator, Bowden's book on navigation, and tried to understand that, and the officers tried to teach me how to take a sextant reading. Mm-hmm. I have to admit that I'm not sure that I really understood the math and the whole business but I tried. Okay. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was just curious about
which kind of did set me up in some respects. I eventually did become a navigator on a submarine, so I must have learned something in those days from it. Or at least got the thirst for it.
Yeah.
But no, it was. So our watches were for the operation of the submarine, and as I mentioned earlier, I was a controllerman in the electrical space, which meant that we were doing the connections between the generators, the diesel generators, the battery, and the electric motors that drove the submarine. And we would, through the electric motors on the shaft, we would control the speed of the submarine. So even if we weren't charging batteries or something like that, we would be on watch, ready to answer bells. So when they rang up 1/3, we would reach up to some rheostats and change that rheostat to increase the RPM of the shaft to a 1/3 speed, stuff like that. And we were mostly, prior to that Westpac tour, we were mostly in 3-section duty, and we were on 4-hour watches, so we had 2 4-hour watches each day, and then generally you did 4 hours of maintenance, and then you got about 4 hours of sleep, and then you were back on watch again. But by the time we got to Hong Kong, we were shorthanded. We would lose sailors along the way. Some of them were getting transferred elsewhere. Some of them were getting out of the service, and some of them were getting into trouble ashore and were left behind. And we were down to, for the electricians, we were down to 4 on and 4 off. That was called port and starboard watches. And that could be exhausting, I guess you could say.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because you still had the maintenance to do, and you were trying to catch some sleep in between all that besides. So,
yeah, I've done.
So it was a fun time, but it wasn't. It was a arduous time as well.
Yeah, I've done port and starboard in about 6 hour on and off, and even that's tough.
Right.
And you know, some people might think about it as like, oh, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, you go sleep or whatever. But as you mentioned, there's other things you still need to complete.
Yep.
And the stress and the lack of sleep and all that, it becomes very, that's a lot for a person.
You know, I mean, luckily, the average age on the nuclear submarines when I was on it was 23 years old. I don't recall on the diesel boat ever knowing a average age. There were certainly quite a few older folks on the diesel submarines than I ever saw on the nuclear submarines. But I was like 21, 22 in that area somewhere, and it didn't seem particularly stressful at the time.
Yeah,
I don't know why, but it didn't. I guess there was a lot of exciting things going on. I got to mention that while we were over there in that Western Pacific, we after the Vietnam a couple months, we got to participate in a training exercise with 3 carriers, a task group that contained 3 aircraft carriers, and we shot and got confirmed kills on all 3. And I still have some pictures from the periscope taken of one of the carriers, and we were probably about 2,000 yards from it when that picture was taken.
Wow.
And at the end of the exercise, the whole battle group was headed to Yokosuka, and they wanted us, the submarine, to come up through the fleet. They had the carriers separated side by side, and we were supposed to come up through them, but we could never catch them, even on the surface at 16 knots. We could not catch up with them anywhere even close to even see them on the horizon. So they finally just let us go. So it was an interesting exercise, I guess you could say. It certainly cemented in my mind the lethality of a submarine, particularly a diesel submarine on the battery,
right.
How quiet it could be.
So we, first command changes port to San Diego.
Right.
We do these exercises at Westpac, and then your time wraps up.
Yeah, well, I guess I spend about 6 months in San Diego. We do daily and weekly ops. Daily ops were really more like 1, 2, 3 day operations, mostly training. Weekly ones might be a bigger training exercise, maybe up around San Francisco or someplace, type of thing. Really not going any place interesting, not doing anything very interesting, just stand and watch and doing maintenance. Mm-hmm. And so it comes time to for the sub to go back on another Western Pacific tour, Westpacs we called them, and so they came to me and said, "Hey, you're going to have to re-enlist or extend for a year to go with us." And I say, "Well, no, I don't think I'm going to do that." Actually, by that time, I had already thought about re-enlisting, but it's just not my nature to just accept something, you know. I want to figure out how I can get the best deal out of it, so to speak. And for myself, that was going to schools the whole time. That 2.5 years, every time they needed somebody to go to a school, you know, usually there are 3-day, 1-week schools, you know, when you're in port type of thing, I would go. So I was the movie projector repairman and stuff like that. You know, anytime there was a school, I'd be the volunteer to go to it. And so I had said no, I wasn't going to go back. I was thinking more about electricians mate B school, and I actually wanted to get to the East Coast instead of being on the West Coast. My and my wife's family all on the East Coast, 3,000 miles. Back we couldn't even afford to make telephone calls, barely could afford a stamp on a envelope. And we hadn't been back home, well, since we've been out to Hawaii. So I got transferred to another submarine, the USS Bagheera, SS 331. A little bit newer, but scheduled to go into the shipyard in San Francisco. So I spent a couple of months operating on that, and then we went up to San Francisco, Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, and went in for an overhaul, battery replacement, stuff like that. In a lot of ways, I really enjoyed that. They had a Quonset huts right there on the base for the sub's crew member families, so I got to bring my wife up and kids. By that time, I had 2 kids up from San Diego, and so we got to see a little bit of Northern California during the 3 months we were in the shipyard there. But I was getting, in fact, it was still in the shipyard when I re-enlisted in August. And but I had gone out looking for work to see what might be available. And so I was trying to get on with the Alameda City Water Department. And in, I think it was July of '65, President Lyndon Johnson, I think it was, decided he was going to put a hold on everybody, at least in the Navy. Nobody could get out of the Navy for at least 6 months. They picked some date 6 months from then would be the soonest. Everybody was involuntarily extended. So by that time, of course, I didn't really like big cities, so Alameda wasn't, you know, really high on my desire list. It was more just to see what's out there. And I decided that we're going to re-enlist and stay in. And so I went up to the XO, who had actually been the navigator on the Bashaw, my previous sub. So I had known him for quite a while. And I told him what I wanted. I wanted to go to electrician's mate B school, and I wanted to go to scuba diver school. Subs all carried scuba divers, so it kind of fit in. I always liked the water, so yeah. I figured, oh, this will be fun, right?
It's your way to swim.
So we talked a while, and he said something. He was a little upset because I was asking for 2 schools, and that's not common to give you 2 schools. And he said something about, well, why don't you just go to hard hat school too? And I said, that sounds interesting. Yes, that's what I want to do. I want B school, scuba school, and hard hat diver school. Well, couple months go by, and the paperwork comes back in, and they're ready to re-enlist me, and I notice that the enlistment contract does not say diver school on it, just electricians make B school. So I cross out where it says you're not being authorized, or you're not being promised anything else, and blah blah blah, and I initial it like you're supposed to do, and I write in diver school. I take it back up to the yeoman, who takes it to the XO, and now he has a fit. You can't change a Navy contract, enlistment contract, and so on and so forth. And I says, well, I told you what I wanted, and you said that you would apply for it. What's the problem? Well, you can't change these things, and blah, blah, blah. So we talk a while, and finally I said, well, he says, you're going to go to diver school. I just can't put it in the contract. So I say to him, well, I've known you a long time. If you look me in the eye and shake my hand and say, you're going to diver school, I'll sign it as it is. So that's what we did. And sure enough, I got to go to diver school. You go first to scuba school. I think that was 6 weeks. And then there was another couple of weeks, maybe 4 weeks or something, of hard hat diver school. And this was the old World War II type of diver outfit too. I'm talking about the leather suit and the brass hat.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was interesting, and I really enjoyed it. But they worked the heck out of you, exercise-wise, which is something on a submarine you don't get much of. So I can't say that I was in the best of shape to do that, so I was hurting all the time. But I still enjoyed it a lot, and I had a really interesting experience when we started, before we started divers school part of it. In fact, before you even started scuba school, it was the first day of being at the school altogether. They want to see if you're claustrophobic. So they put you in the hard hat diving outfit and sent you down a ladder till you were just submerged enough, and then brought you back up. And they had outfitted this helmet, which it normally doesn't have, with a microphone and a speaker, and a couple of wires coming out. So we're all standing in line, and the guy ahead of me he goes down, he comes up, and he had gotten sick inside the helmet. And the master diver's there with this big brass helmet, and he's doing this. And he says, okay, O'Day, you're next. And I said, aren't you going to rinse that out? And he says, we can't. The speaker and the microphone will get all wet. Come here, come on, put that on.
Oh my God.
So if you're not claustrophobic under those conditions, you would never be, I don't think. And I had never been. I had gone down torpedo tubes, crawled through superstructures on submarines in the dry dock and so on, and it never bothered me. So the only thing that bothered me there was the smell. But I got past it and so on. So from diver school, I went to Great Lakes again for electricians mate B school. And while I was there, I made first class petty officer. And because I was a qualified scuba diver, I got sent to the USS Gudgeon out of electricians mate B school.
What was their home port?
They were in the shipyard at Vallejo, California at the time. And I think the home port was going to be Hawaii again. But as I had mentioned, the Thresher had gone down. They had done, this was several years later now, 2 years later, three years later. And all their studies and analysis had indicated that on the Thresher, one of the hull valves had given way, and there wasn't any backup hull valve. So, and it was an internal pipe. So that had caused the flooding that was uncontrollable. So they had decided to do all the old submarines. We redo those with what they called a sub-safe package, which meant they were going to put a second hull valve on, move all the pipes from inside the hull to outside the hull that could be moved out there, that didn't need to be inside the hull. So that would limit the amount of pipe that could rupture and do uncontrollable flooding. And the Gudgeon class was made as a fast attack submarine. I forget when it was built now. I think it was designed and built in 56, 58 time frame. And it turns out that the design was unstable when making high-speed turns underwater. And so they decided that it needed to be lengthened by 20 feet. And it had a peculiarity to submarines of the time where the engine room and the control room being where, as an electrician, I would work, were one watertight compartment. And so they separated the engine room and control room by 20 feet, put in that section, put in a bulkhead between the two, and they stripped all the pipes out. So basically they tore that submarine down to nothing but a hull. Everything inside, every pipe and wire and piece of equipment was removed. It had been cut in half, and it was all removed out. It was all being rebuilt. So it spent over a year in the shipyard, and I was there for almost all of that 1 year. But at that point, when I first arrived to the Gudgeon, as with all the submarines I was ever on, you had an interview with the captain within a day or 2 days of arriving on board. So I had my interview with that captain, and he was looking through my record and asking me some questions and so on. And he says, "I see you have applied for the Navy Enlisted Scientific Education Program in the past." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "What happened with that?" And I said, "Well, I applied when I was on the Bashaw, and that application got sent to Washington, but got sent back for some reason. They wanted something different, but because we were in Westpac, it never caught up to us till we were back in San Diego, and the selection was well over with by that time." And I said, I tried to apply again at Great Lakes during EMB school, and the school's command said that they don't do any of that. They wouldn't process any of those types of applications, that they didn't have the personnel to do it. And he says, "Well, why don't we do it?" And I said, "Well, the deadline was last week." And he said, "No problem, we'll backdate it." And this is a guy who eventually made admiral and was head of Naval Personnel Command. So, but anyway, so they did. That week they held a board and sent it in, and really that's the last I heard about it for I guess about 9 months, something like that. But the week before I heard about the results of that, I was talking to the XO about something. He says, "Oh, by the way, I got orders in for you to go to a submarine rescue ship out of Pearl Harbor." And I said, "Oh, you did?" And I said, "Oh, that's interesting," because they have hard hat divers on there. And I thought, that might be interesting to go. I had forgotten how seasick I get on surface ships. And he said, "I didn't think you'd be interested, so that's why I didn't tell you about it." And I said, "Well, why wouldn't I be interested?" And he says, "Well, the results of the NESEP board should be coming out within another week or so." And I said, "I'm probably not going to make that." And he said, "I wouldn't be so sure." So I said, "Well, let's wait and see." Okay. And sure enough, that's the year I had gotten selected to participate in that. So then I left the Gudgeon to go down to San Diego to a college preparatory school that was run down there. that was a 3-month school in San Diego that, if I remember right, I think there was 4 classes. I know there was math, physics, chemistry, something else that escapes me at the moment. 5 days a week, and enough homework and reading assignments to keep you busy at nights and weekends that there really wasn't much time to do anything else. I think I got to see my wife about 2 or 3 times on 2 or 3 weekends during that period. But just as my time at Quonset Point Naval Air Station with the tutoring, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So while you're there, they send out a government service civilian doctor something, I forget the name now, but anyway, he interviews you, and you get to decide which of the 22 colleges, universities around the country that the Navy had agreements with to apply to. So I had to apply just like any other student, and he helps you decide which one you want to go to.
Now, and did this going to college, like, did it guarantee a commission after?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So going through this interview with this doctor, and he said, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to go to University of Washington and take oceanography. And he says, well, how many years of French do you have? I say, French? English is almost like a second language to me. None. Well, you know, you got to have 4 years of French to get into the University of Washington oceanography program. Well, a lot of the oceanography work of those days was written in French textbooks. I guess. I don't. Maybe he was stretching it a little bit. I don't know. But and he says, and I see him there with his clipboard, you know, and he's doing this, you know, long pauses in between all these questions and answers. And he says, well, you know, we don't have any, so you can go wherever you want to apply. He says, we don't have any quotas about what you got to take or where you got to go. He says, but I think you ought to go to North Carolina State University and take electrical engineering. And I said, you know, I really don't want to. I'd like to get out of that field. And he says, well, the Navy needs electrical engineers, and the Navy needs naval officers who understand the needs of the Navy. I want you to go back to the barracks tonight and think about that and come back and see me tomorrow. So, yes, sir. So I go back and think about it for about 30 seconds, and the next morning I go back and say, you know, I think I'd like to go to North Carolina State University, take electrical engineering. He says, okay. So that was it. That's how I got it. I had to go look up where North Carolina was, by the way. I thought it was down like around Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas, or something like that down in there. So it was an interesting experience. In those days, I had a 1965 cargo van that I had converted into a camper. 2 kids, 3 and 4 years old. And we drove from San Diego to Raleigh, North Carolina, straight through. Never stopped except for gas. Wife and I taking turns driving, 48 hours of driving to get there. Couldn't afford motels. Even Motel 6, which I'm sure was named in those days Motel 6 because it only cost $6 a night. Other than gas stops, we might have stopped to get something to eat. I forget. We had a cooler, I know, and we picked up stuff along the way. And so we roll into Raleigh, North Carolina, downtown. It turns out the The major highway dumped you right into downtown. We stopped at a stoplight. I'm the first one under the light, looking across the intersection. Here's a police car, lights flashing, car pulled over in front of it. As we slowly take off, the light turns and we take off, and I can see the policeman has got the trunk of the car open, taking these mason jars, tops off, pouring this water down the drains. So that was my introduction to North Carolina. And it was definitely a cultural shock for me. And the whole southern, culture, I guess you could say, of okra and turnip greens and hush puppies and catfish, and there was just lots of things that were so different that I could hardly imagine it, that I was in the same country. You go to a grocery store and you bought 10 pounds of sugar, you would have to sign for it. They wanted to know who was buying 10 or more pounds of sugar at a time. You knew who the moonshiner's house was because he had the new unpainted door on his, like 20 by 20 house, the tin roof and a front porch and 3 blocks high off the ground type of thing and stuff like that.
Did you have to do a full 4 years there?
4 years, yep. You didn't have to do 4 years. There are some folks that left at the end of 3 years. I loved it so much, though, that I stretched it out. I made sure that I didn't take all the required courses for a degree from the university until my senior year. So I forget what it was now. One of the basic, maybe it was, I had to take a speech class and a tech writing class and 2 history classes, if I remember right.
Is your time in service still count while you're
Yes, I had my full pay and allowances. By that time, they had already changed the hazardous duty pay. So once you qualified as a submariner and were still qualified to go back, you continued to get that hazardous duty pay while you're on shore duty.
Oh, wow.
That wasn't the case before, so I'd never wanted to go to shore duty before that. But I think about a year before I went to university, that had changed.
Did they commission you before?
After. So I was considered a midshipman while there. At first, we wore our regular enlisted uniforms every day on Friday. But this was 67, September 67, 68, and the protests against the Vietnam War on campus were growing, and so they told us not to wear uniforms. And we didn't have an ROTC unit there. Those universities with an ROTC unit, the NESEP folks would have to drill with them on weekends and stuff, attend their types of classes and so on. But as NC State didn't have a ROTC, I didn't have to do any of that stuff. So it's just attending classes. I was first class petty officer, making $435 a month, which was not bad for the time. And I could afford to buy a house. I bought a house. House cost me $112 a month. That included taxes and insurance and
so it was a pretty good life.
So it was wonderful. It was the best. I mean, I don't know how you could even imagine a better full scholarship. They gave me a credit card for the bookstore. The ship, the boat before I left it, had loaded me up with a cardboard box full of pens and paper and notebooks and stuff. And I never saw a bill from the university. They went to the Navy Department. We had a lieutenant there and some office space. We had to muster every Friday and just check in And at the end of a semester, the lieutenant would call you in and talk to you about how you were doing and so on. And when I arrived, they gave us a list of, here's the courses that you're going to take for the next 4 years, 185 credit hours. In those days, you needed, I think, 135 hours to get a degree in electrical engineering. So we're taking about 50 extra courses, credit hour courses.
Now, at this time, do you, as a submariner, do you have to go to the nuclear school yet?
Nope. Certainly not while I was at the university. And actually, by the time when I first got back in '65 to San Diego, they had changed the rules about who gets to go to nuclear power school. And they didn't want, well, maybe it was after that, but they didn't want first-class petty officers anymore. They wanted more trainable people. But anyway, no. So I didn't have to do anything. We spent 2 summers, the first 2 summers there, going full-time to school. And then in the junior year summer, we went to OCS up in Newport, Rhode Island. And came back, actually even before I started my junior, finished the sophomore year, I had over 125 credit hours. I just didn't have the one basic course I needed to get a degree. So I came back from OCS, and I wasn't too concerned about both graduating and staying there.
What did you have to do at OCS? Like, you actually go to OCS?
We had to go to OCS, go through the regular curriculum.
Oh, okay. So they made you go through, like,
everything.
The beginning. Strip you down.
There was a lot of ROTC. Okay. But compared to boot camp, I mean, that was... It wasn't anything that would concern us. It was more we kind of considered it a lot of how do I say this on camera? To give you an idea, we made up T-shirts with Mickey Mouse head on it and an arrow through the ears, and we had some saying about OCS on it that I wouldn't want to repeat.
Were you in a class?
They didn't want to. After the first night of wearing them at the sports events, they wouldn't let us wear them anymore. But
was your class?
All the NECEPs were in one group. Okay. Yeah, 1 or 2 groups. I mean, there was only NECEPs in our company, I guess it was. I don't even remember now.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Was if there were civilians who were now training like it is today. But
right.
Okay. Just
a lot of ROTC folks there.
Okay.
Yeah. So we got through that, and I went back, and at the start of a semester, the lieutenant would have to sign for all the courses that you were signing up for. You'd have a sheet from the university of here's all the courses you wanted to take that semester, and we knew what they were. They're on this this paper that we had from the very beginning, and so, by that time I had learned that there was a 2-week period at the beginning of the semester that you could drop and add courses. And the university didn't require the lieutenant's signature for dropping or adding a course. So I got to start taking some courses that I thought would be more interesting than electrical engineering courses. So I dropped some of those, and I took oceanography. But the only oceanography classes that they were just starting that fall. And it was going to be a master's degree in oceanography. They didn't have an undergraduate program as yet. They had gotten a professor from Johns Hopkins, I think it was, to come down there and start teaching it. So anyway, I dropped some and took some of those, and I did that the second semester too. They never really
caught on to what you were doing?
Yeah, I think they must have caught on. I don't remember if there was never any big issue about it. And so I got all the basic courses in oceanography needed to get a master's degree, except that I never did the thesis and so on. There wasn't any time for that. But I also kind of figured out that oceanography master's degree is more about math, and particularly types of math that I wasn't really prepared for, I guess you'd say. So I never did pursue it after that. I never really had a reason to pursue it after that either. I mean, in May we graduated, and the same day we got commissioned.
And where do you go after?
Well, from there, this is now 1971. I go up to Groton, Connecticut, to officer submarine school, which is 6 months, a 6-month school now.
So much training.
And, well, I liked it, and that's really why.
You're getting paid.
I mean, I was, getting paid to do it, and
treating you well, treating your family well. Yeah, everybody's taken care of.
Yeah, well, by that time, I mean, certainly as an ensign, I was making more than I was as a first-class petty officer, and so on. But anyway, so that was 6 months, and from there, I got to go to another 3-month course down in Dam Neck, Virginia, to become a strategic weapons officer on a nuclear submarine. So this was a weapons officer course. We learned about the Polaris and Poseidon missiles, and the fire control systems that can control them, and so on. And so from there, then I went to my first nuclear submarine, the USS Lafayette, SSBN 616. And it was operating out of Charleston, South Carolina. So I moved my family down to there. And it was like the day before Christmas, so we spent Christmas Eve eating at the KFC there.
Could I ask a question about what was it like going to the command now as an officer? Because you already seemed like you had a lot of leadership traits in your enlisted career from the very beginning. Yeah. Did you ever feel different when you went as an officer?
Well, I did. I felt different in some respects. Let me finish though that I got my family down there, and I leave about 3 days later to fly out with the crew because the sub was operating out of Rota, Spain. So I don't really know any of the crew people, don't know anybody that's going to be working in my divisions and so on. I think I go into the office space like the day before we're to fly out, and just to check in with the XO and so on, and figure out how we get to the plane and all that stuff. And we fly over to Rota, Spain, and get down onto the ship. And so that's really the first time that I meet any of these folks. And when you go to a submarine, you get qualified on the submarine, and the qualification generally can take 6 months to a year, where you have to learn every system on board. And if I back up a little bit, you also get to, or have to learn how to operate almost every piece of equipment, including the radio equipment, the navigation equipment. Now, as enlisted, you might not have to learn, let's say, quite as much about all that what I call the exterior communications with the submarine and so on, as you might with interior. But on the other hand, as enlisted, you had to know a whole lot more in being able to work in the dark. So as an electrician, for instance, on my first diesel submarine, I had to know where every switchboard was on the ship, what switches were on it and what there were for. Some of these had 3 and 4 positions, and I would have to know what every position was for and how to get to them by feel. So when you went to get qualified, they put a blindfold on you and took you around and to a compartment and said, okay, go shut off the power to this or that.
Yeah.
Why? Because in a fire, the lights are going to get turned off. Battle lanterns might come on. You might have, if you were lucky, you might have enough light to actually see by. But you had to be able to find your way to turn off certain pieces of equipment that might still be running in the location of the fire. So anyway, and at the end of that period, you get a pair of silver dolphins as enlisted or gold dolphins as a officer. And if you were wearing silver dolphins, it's kind of like being the senior in high school, right? You had that attitude. You know, you knew what life was all about. And everybody else that didn't have those silver dolphins didn't. So you tended to, one, look up to and follow the direction, particularly in an emergency, of the dolphin wearers.
Yeah. Did you already have?
So I had silver dolphins. I'd had silver dolphins for about 8 years by that time.
Yeah.
And had been requalified on 3 other submarines besides. So I get to this, on board this first nuclear submarine. And that's like, to me, that's like the RV of the submarine world. I had grown up on the Model A's. This was completely, foreign to me. It's almost like going to a surface ship. I would really have no idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't wear my silver dolphins because I didn't want anybody on board to think I knew what the hell I was doing. If there's an emergency that day, don't look to me to figure out where to go close the ventilation into this compartment or even what systems are in this compartment.
Yeah.
So that was really the big change. And I wouldn't, on my working uniform, which on the nuclear submarines was what we called poopy suits. They were a rayon coverall, blue, navy blue. And you would wear a rating device on your collar and the dolphins or no dolphins on it. And generally they were patches sewn on. They weren't the metal ones because the metal ones could catch as you're going through hatches and stuff like that, on your uniform. So you didn't wear the metal ones. And that was a big change from the diesel boats where our uniform was cut off pair of dungarees. They actually issued you something called submarine sandals and a white t-shirt. And nobody wore any collar devices except the captain. The rest of the officers dressed just like us, except they had khaki shorts on. And so the diesel boats were kind of like McHale's Navy, if you remember that show about the Navy. Anyway, it was kind of loose, I guess you'd say. Comshaw is how you got everything done, which was going trading some coffee for somebody to go do some work on your submarine. But anyway, nuclear submarines, completely different environment. I mean, these people were serious. And you had to be. Nuclear weapons, nuclear reactor, lots of opportunity for disaster. Nobody wanted you in their port to begin with. The few places we could actually pull into, other than our home ports, were not very exciting places. And I never did pull into any place myself in the 5 years. I spent 5 years on that submarine. Never pulled in any place except our home ports.
So you mostly just do training exercises?
No, we were on alert when we're at sea, and we're only in port and for upkeep. So upkeep was was like 23 days. And that was a time when we had 2 crews, the blue and the gold. And you would come on board. So we flew over from Charleston, South Carolina, Rota, Spain. And we went down on the ship. The other crew was just back in from their patrol. We spent 3 days with what's called turnover, doing the maintenance and getting the tender started on their maintenance work, and learning from the other crew how things went on this last patrol, what's out of commission, what needs work, and so on. And then they fly on home, and we spend the next 20 days finishing up the upkeep and getting underway. You go out, generally that same day, you get to a dive point, you dive, and you stay submerged for 72 days. And you're on alert. Alert meaning that you can launch your missiles within 15 minutes. So
you're mostly trying to track or be alert about the Russians?
So for us, as a missile-carrying submarine, which we refer to as boomers, for the big boom that the missiles would make, our job was to avoid everybody. So we were alert to anybody that we could even hear. And we would try to get to some place where they couldn't hear or find us. So pretty much it was running away from everybody.
Yeah.
Even our own. We had a certain geographical area we had to stay within so that our missiles would be able to reach the targets that we were assigned. So other than that, we could go anywhere, anytime within that area. And mostly we did it as quietly as we could possibly do it. That first patrol, we carried doctors, actual doctors on board. If there was a health emergency of some sort, he would have to deal with it. We wouldn't break patrol and take him off.
Yeah.
Things like things that happened on patrol. After that first patrol, we didn't have any problems.
You're on
the most fun we had with the corpsmen and the doctors was trying to stir them up by making them think we're crazy.
Yeah.
But go ahead, your question.
You're on this ship for 5 years, you said.
Yeah, right.
Now, do you make it all the way to lieutenant while you're on board?
Yep.
Just because of the way the Navy promotes?
Right. So I was in a lieutenant's billet as an ensign.
Oh, wow.
That helped. Except that at the time, they didn't really want to promote anybody. And they were doing what they called frocking, where they advanced you to Lieutenant JG, but they didn't give you the pay.
Mm-hmm.
So I refused to get advanced. I had this idea that if I accepted the advancement, that would change the count of the number of officers they had in appropriate billets. Right? They keep track of, how many ensigns are in a lieutenant's billet, for instance.
Yeah.
Or later in life, as a lieutenant commander, I was in a captain's billet. And you're never supposed to have an officer of more than one grade lower in a billet. So as an ensign, I was like the statistic that the Navy had to contend with that said, we don't have enough officers. We've got X many that are in billets that are higher grade than they should be in.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more money for personnel or whatever. I don't know how all that works, but that was my theory, that if I refused that advancement, that it would help the statistics, so maybe they would start paying me sooner. And I explained all this to the XO, and he wasn't really buying it, but I still refused for about 6 months. And then my mother was coming to visit me when we're back in the States, and I thought it'd be nice if she got to pin the JG bars onto my collar. So I went to the XO and said, well, I'd like to get advanced now. He had to fit again, he didn't want to
was there
have to have a special ceremony and all that, especially when I told him my mother was coming, I wanted her to do the pinning. So, but he went through it. He was a good guy.
Yeah.
He did it, but.
Did a lot of the crew remain the same during your time?
No, you had about a 25% turnover.
Okay.
Every year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly it was 2 and 3 year tours in those days. So where were we? We were, so I got to make that patrol. We came back in, and it turns out that the weapons officer, I was an assistant weapons officer as an ensign, and the weapons officer was a lieutenant. And the lieutenant that was supposedly going to fly over and relieve the lieutenant weapons officer on my crew, got diagnosed like the week before with a disease that prohibited him from going on a submarine. So they took the assistant weapons officer, made him weapons officer, and decided I should just turn around and go back out to sea again as assistant weapons officer on that crew. So, and it also turned out that my wife had made plans to come over and, oh no, let's see, I'm sorry, that wasn't quite yet. So I did that. So I did the upkeep and went back out to sea again, another 72 days. So that actually, by that time, now I've got two patrols, and what you have to understand about those patrols is they are months of boredom interspaced by moments of sheer terror.
Yeah.
So I had lots of time to qualify, and I was kind of used to qualifying, so I pretty much completed my qualifications in that time. And so as that ended, we pulled back into Rota, Spain, and my wife had decided to surprise me over there, come over and meet us, and so I got leave. They took pity on me for having spent the last 6 months at sea, and other than that 3 days when I settled them in Charleston and took them to KFC for dinner, I hadn't been back to Charleston. So I got 30 days leave, and the wife and I traveled around Spain, Gibraltar, French Morocco, Tangiers there, back up to Portugal, ship up to Portsmouth, England, over to Ireland, up to Scotland, and I flew back with another crew from Holyloch, Scotland, and was flying back to the States, and my wife took a commercial back. So 30 days, we spent 30 days traveling around Europe, including her airfare. It was $1,000. And I'm telling you, that's when a US dollar was worth something. The best hotel right on the water in Tangiers cost me $3 a night.
Wow.
$3 US a night. We only left Tangiers because every restaurant's menu was in French, and I still didn't know any French. So we pointed to the table next door that looked like something like a toasted cheese sandwich and a Coke. And for 3 days we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in that restaurant, eating toasted cheese sandwiches and Cokes.
Yeah.
And we were tired of them. So we said, let's go back to Gibraltar. So there was a change of home port then. Instead of going back to Charleston, we all headed to Groton, Connecticut to go into the shipyard. That submarine had been Polaris missiles on board up until that time. We went we actually spent the summer first doing midshipman runs. So perhaps out of OCS, did you ever get to go on a ship for a day or a week or anything just to see what any of that stuff was like? Well, what they would do is take the academy folks in the summer, and we'd take them out to sea for a day. And so you'd get underway in the morning, you go out, you do what we called angles and dangles, just taking the sub up and surfacing, going back down, and so on, just to show them, what it's all about. And bring them back in the evening and redo that. So there's 2 officers on weapons officers, myself and as assistant weapons officer and a weapons officer. He had a death in the family. They let him go, so that meant I had to duty every day. Because as weapons officers, we're important to start with because there's only 2 weapons trained officers on board. Mm-hmm. Nobody else could stand that duty. And so that was interesting times. Then we went into the shipyard, and they were converting the sub from Polaris missiles to Poseidon missiles, which required cutting the missile top portion of the missile tubes outside the hull off and putting on a new extended missile. I forget how much longer the Polaris was the Poseidon was than the Polaris missile. Yeah. But couldn't have been too much, but it was just enough that they did that. And that ended up, they did a lot of other things as well, reactor core change and other things, but that ended up taking 2 years because the welding techniques of the day weren't quite good enough, I guess you could say. Yeah. They would get a lot of this light cracking of the weld joints. They would have to heat them up in order to weld them to begin with, and then when they cooled, they get these spider web type of looking cracks in them. So they had to cut it out and re-weld it several times until they finally perfected the technique. We were the first ones to get converted from Polaris to Poseidon, so we were the first they were doing this to.
Oh, nice.
That's why it took the extra time, I think.